A crowded shopping centre in central Ukraine has been hit by a Russian missile. President Zelensky says 1,000 people were inside at the time. Officials say at least 10 are dead and more than 40 injured. The attack came shortly after the Ukrainian president had appealed to world leaders at the G7 summit for missile defence systems to protect more Ukrainian cities. Tonight, Boris Johnson called the attack barbaric. NATO has announced plans to boost its quick reaction force from 40,000 to more than 300,000 troops. It says the move follows a direct threat from Russia to European security. The plan is due to be approved at a summit in Madrid this week. Good evening. A shopping centre in central Ukraine has been hit by a Russian missile. President Zelensky said around 1,000 people were inside, and he said it was impossible to even imagine the number of victims. So far, at least 10 people are thought to have been killed and more than 40 have been injured in what the authorities have described as a war crime. The local governor said it was unlikely many survivors would be found in the rubble because it was a big fire and there was a lot of smoke. The attack took place in Kremenchuk, an industrial city and the site of Ukraine's biggest oil refinery. Russia says it does not deliberately target civilians. Joe Inwood has sent this report a warning. It contains some details you may find distressing.
There is no part of Ukraine untouched by this war. Just before 4 in the afternoon, Russian missiles are said to have hit a shopping centre in Kremenchuk. The Ukrainians say around 1,000 people may have been inside. This industrial city on the banks of the Dnieper River has been targeted before, but not like this. Is anybody alive? Anybody alive? A man calls out. Where? Come here. People nearby rushed to help, but there was panic at the scale of the destruction. The injured were rushed to hospital. One of those nearby was Vadim Yudenko.
I was not far away from the place where it happened, some 500 meters away, and people were running around. And after about 30 minutes, I decided to go and check out the place. The center was just destroyed. I'm out of words. I did not expect that something like this could happen in my town.
Ukraine's President Zelensky was quick to condemn the attack. It was no danger to the Russian army, he said. It had no strategic value. It was just people trying to live a normal life, which so angers the Russian occupiers. Moscow is yet to comment on the attack, but has always denied targeting civilians. The death toll is expected to rise. Another example of the human cost of a war that shows no sign of ending. And in the last hour or so, Dmytro Lunin, he's the governor of the region in which the attack took place, said this was a crime against humanity, a deliberate and cynical attack on a civilian population. Those were sentiments echoed by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, speaking at the G7, where, of course, aid for Ukraine is a key topic. He said this shows there are no depths to which President Putin will not sink.
Joe Inwood in Kyiv. Thank you. The missile struck shortly after President Zelensky had addressed world leaders at the G7 in Germany and called for more assistance, including missile defence systems, to protect Ukrainian cities a long way from the front line. Leaders said they will support Ukraine for as long as it takes in its fight against Russia. Our political editor Chris Mason is at the summit. Chris.
A real sense here of shock at what has happened this afternoon in Ukraine. The government, the British government here, calling it callous and counterproductive and saying it and fellow G7 leaders will redouble their efforts to help Ukraine as a result of what has happened today. Here's a sense of the discussions on that topic of Ukraine today.
On the small screen in the corner, but the big theme of this summit, the man whose country's future dominates conversation here. President Zelensky told G7 leaders the war mustn't drag on over winter. If Ukraine wins, you all win, he said.
Fantastic. Morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm all right, how are you?
The Prime Minister told me he and G7 leaders are determined to help Ukraine, but it could take time, patience and money.
And what they want is their land. They want their country to be able to live in peace and freedom. And I totally support that. And so I think The difficulty is that no one here at the G7 can really see any alternative to simply supporting them in regaining their sovereignty.
Because that goes on for years and years and years, potentially, at vast cost to our country, to our taxpayers, with implications for our economy. So be it. That's what the UK has to do.
I think that the economic impacts on the UK will start to abate. We'll find ways around things, and some of the cost pressures will start to come down.
So there's no limit on the timeline, there's no limit on the budget, the billions that Britain could spend?
I think that sometimes the price of freedom is worth paying. And you know, just remember, it took the democracies in the middle of the last century a long time to recognise that they had to resist tyranny and aggression. But what it bought in the end, with the defeat of the dictators, particularly of the Nazi Germany, it brought decades and decades of stability, and that is worth protecting, that is worth defending, and that delivers long-term prosperity.
Chris Mason, BBC News at the G7 summit in Bavaria.
Well, among the issues discussed at the G7 was the growing risk to global food supplies caused by the war in Ukraine. It comes as farmers there accuse Russian forces of stealing vast amounts of grain. Ukraine normally supplies 10% of the world's wheat. A quarter of all the grain grown in Ukraine is here, in these areas that have been seized by Russia. Ukraine says 800,000 tons of grain have been taken and transported back to Russia. Well, the Russians are also blockading ports in Ukraine, ports like Odessa, meaning the amount of wheat being exported will almost halve. And many of the world's poorest countries rely on Ukraine's wheat. There'll be less food now for 300 million people. Our correspondent Nick Beake has the story.
Russian forces in Ukraine are accused of war crimes, murder and rape. But they're also accused of stealing Ukrainian grain on an industrial scale.
They destroyed our premises, destroyed our equipment. Everything they saw, everything they touch disappears.
We tried to contact more than 200 farmers whose land is now in Russian-occupied territory. The vast majority were too scared to talk, but one did agree to be interviewed. To protect his identity, we've changed his name and are using an actor.
They looted our offices, even pulled the wiring from the walls and took away the photographs of our relatives.
And this was the moment the Russians arrived at the farm. You can see their Z symbol on the tanks. One soldier tries to shoot the security camera, but misses. Thousands of tons of grain were then taken and transported in stolen lorries. Using its GPS tracker, we followed the route of one truck, travelling to Crimea, which Moscow annexed 8 years ago, and then on to mainland Russia, where it's feared Ukrainian grain is being packed up and exported as Russian grain. On the way, the truck stopped here at this grain store, where a new Z symbol has appeared on the roof. Ukrainian officials fear the Russians have stolen as much as 800,000 tons of grain since the invasion. It's bringing back memories of the Great Famine that Joseph Stalin inflicted on this country nearly a century ago. Ukraine's flag tells you all you need to know. A blue sky over a yellow field encapsulates just how important this fertile land is to people. It's the soul of the country. And so the Russian occupation and theft of Ukrainian grain has a profound effect on people here. Grain that isn't being robbed is being destroyed. This footage, posted by the Ukrainian military, is said to show Russian forces blowing up a grain store. Moscow denies it's destroying or robbing Ukrainian produce. But instead, it claims it's nationalizing Ukraine's grain. We obtained one document from a Russian-installed authority that says to ensure the food security of the area, there's now an order to take the wheat and barley from the warehouse of a company.
I think there are so many people in the world now sitting eating a sandwich, not realizing that this grain has been stolen and that so many people are suffering. I don't understand why the world is silent and not doing anything to punish this injustice.
The wholesale theft of Ukrainian grain threatens to cripple this vital sector of an economy already under such strain. A Russian crime targeting individual farmers will be felt by a whole nation and beyond. Nick Beak, BBC News, Ukraine.